Hello and welcome to session 4 of the marriage preparation course.
There was an article in the paper recently about a woman called Ina Marshall who was being helped by her husband John to open cards on her 98th birthday.
But amongst the cards there was also a telegram from the Queen congratulating her on reaching 100.
Well, Mrs. Marshall had no choice but to come clean. She admitted that when, 80 years previously, she met 18-year-old John Marshall, who really is 98, it wasn't done for a woman to be walking out with, let alone marrying, a younger man.
So the 20-year-old Ina subtracted 2 years from her age, and until the telegram arrived, her husband of 75 years was none the wiser. We like the title of the article, which was Toy Boy, aged 98, discovers his wife's oldest secret.
The question we want to address in this session is, how do we keep our love growing over the whole course of a marriage?
We sometimes hear people say that's impossible. Others say it's a matter of luck, or that it only happens if we marry Mr. or Mrs. Right, as if there was only one person in the world we could possibly marry.
But we disagree with that. We believe it is possible to keep our love alive and growing if we're deliberate about it and if we work at it. We want to look at what it takes to do that.
A marriage between two people who are lovers and best friends is a very powerful combination. And the friendship between us as husband and wife needs to be nurtured just as much as any other friendships. There are a number of things that enable a friendship to grow.
First, friends confide in each other. The other day, we were watching a TV programme about Queen Victoria shortly after her marriage to Prince Albert. She was asking her Prime Minister if she should talk to her new husband about political matters. She was worried that he might disagree with some of them because he was coming from a German perspective. Her Prime Minister gave a wise reply. He said, "Disagreements are not nearly as dangerous in a marriage as secrets. Secrets breed mistrust."
Secondly, friends talk to each other. Another English word meaning friendship is companionship. That comes from the Latin meaning taking bread together. And it points to the importance of meal times for building friendships, as they provide regular opportunities for conversation.
That reminds me of what happened when we went to that hotel in Scotland and left our children, years ago when they were much younger, with my parents. We went to stay in this small hotel in the Highlands, and we were so looking forward to having lots of time together to talk without the children around. We arrived at the hotel in the evening, unpacked, and went down to the dining room.
It was full of other couples, most of whom looked as though they'd been married for at least 25 years. However, apart from the sound of knives and forks on the plates, there was total silence.
And to make it worse, we were given a table right in the middle of the room. And so we had to sit as close as possible, talking in whispers, so as not to be overheard by everyone else.
Now, I'm sure that if those same couples had been out with friends, or even if they'd been at a party with complete strangers, they wouldn't have sat in silence throughout the evening. I bet they'd have made an effort to initiate conversation.
Sadly, that happens with lots of couples. The tragedy for many husbands and wives is that they don't realise their greatest effort should be made with each other.
Of course, that isn't always easy to do when we're tired in the evening. It can be so tempting just to sit down and unwind in front of the TV, and we end up eating our meals on our lap.
The problem is, TV dinners are a real killer when it comes to keeping love alive in a marriage. If we stop talking to each other at meal times, before we know it, we've fallen out of the habit of talking to each other at all.
I think one of the problems with TV dinners and the time you spend is that it's a non-time. The television takes over, you don't communicate, the food goes down, you don't know what you've eaten, and there's actually no appreciation for, if either of us have cooked, there's no appreciation of what we've done to cook and no appreciation of each other. And conversation doesn't happen at all. So we now put a candle on the table and sit at the table, and we switch the television off, and we spend the time eating and talking together.
Yes, you need to value each other and see where each of you have been through the day and what's happened. And TV doesn't allow that. TV dinner's just no-go area now.
However long or short a time we've known each other, we can fall into the trap of not making an effort with each other.
It's interesting that a good conversationalist isn't someone who has the most interesting things to say, but the one who is best at asking questions. Good questions are the ones that are enjoyable to answer and help draw the other person out.
I find that there are times in our relationship where I might need to draw out answers from Jason if he's not being very forthcoming. So at the start of the relationship, I'd get quite frustrated because I'd ask him questions and I'd just get back sort of monosyllabic answers, sort of yes, no, sort of, what I learned was that actually you've got to ask more open questions. So things like, so what are you thinking about at the moment, or how was your day for you? What sort of things did you do? And I found that by asking more open questions, Jason knew what sort of direction I was heading in, or he felt more free just to express what he was thinking or feeling.
Certainly, I guess with Amy asking me more questions, I feel I have to share more of myself.
Asking our partner open questions may sound rather contrived, but I know they work. I love it when Nikki asks me something like, what would be your dream holiday? Or what have been the two most romantic things we've ever done together? Secondly, friends talk to one another.
Thirdly, friends have fun together. Friendship is built on shared experiences. Shared experiences lead to shared memories. And of course, pursuing those interests that we have in common will stimulate conversation.
Tony Campolo, the sociologist and author, says that the complaint he hears most often from couples who are having problems in their marriages, we don't have fun together any longer.
That's why it's so important that we continue throughout our marriage to do things together, fun things that we both enjoy, and that may well have brought us together in the first place.
When we met, we met through salsa dancing, so salsa class.
Don't tell people. Go on, sorry.
It's a nice Sunday class, and then we just go along like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and that's how we met. But we've kept that going because we find that we've got so much in common. Like we like moving, dancing, we enjoy cooking. Well, we enjoy eating more to the point than cooking, but it's the actual preparation together. Before Steve did the job that he did, he was a chef beforehand, and that's, I feel like I'm sort of like, when I'm in the kitchen, you do your own thing, but when Steve's in there, it's like master chef.
It's not quite master chef, I just like things done properly.
Yeah, so I'm on chopping duty, onion duty.
Preparation, that's what it's called. Preparations.
But it's good fun though. It's good fun because like you're doing something together, and it's you get sort of talk and sort of you can talk about your everyday thing, but overdo something that you actually enjoy doing together.
We want you to turn to the first exercise, building friendship, and think about those things that you enjoy doing together. We want you each to write down 6 things.
So, for example, it may be a sport, cooking, walking, going to films, football matches, concerts.
It could be going out for a drink, exploring new places together, shopping or doing DIY. When you've finished, compare your lists.
By asking you to focus on these things now, our purpose is that as your marriage progresses, you can ask yourselves if you're still having fun doing these or other things that you both enjoy. The aim is that you don't lose sight of what an important part these are in building your friendship. And we'll give you 10 minutes. So, the first way of keeping love alive throughout a marriage is developing our friendship. The second way is to discover how our partner feels loved.
If I think back to the times I've felt most loved by Nikki, it's when we've been together on our own, particularly times that Nikki's planned and initiated, when I've had his undivided attention. For example, when Nikki and I went to Paris for 2 days, I loved just walking about the city with him, exploring, looking at art galleries, or simply having a cup of coffee at a cafe. Other occasions are more mundane moments at home, such as when Nikki makes breakfast on a Saturday morning, and we can talk and read the papers together without having to rush off to work. Spending time with Nikki is the most important thing for me to feel loved. For Nikki, though, it's quite different.
For me, I feel most loved when Scilla says encouraging things to me, such as when she compliments me on a talk I've given or on my carpentry. And if I've made something for Scilla, I like her to say something complimentary about it every day for at least a week.
So you can see I feel loved through the time Nikki spends with me, whereas Nikki feels most loved through the words that I speak to him.
Gary Chapman, in his excellent book, The 5 Love Languages, identifies 5 quite separate ways of expressing love to another person.
We want to run through what those are and explain how we can show love in these ways to our husband or wife.
The first way we can express love is through speaking loving, affirming words. Loving words means telling our husband or wife how special they are. We can encourage them, compliment them, or make sure we thank them for the things they do for us.
The second way of expressing love is through spending quality time with our husband or wife. Quality time might mean sitting down with our husband or wife to hear how their day's been, giving them our undivided attention and putting time in our diaries to be together.
I learned that Miles's love language is quality time, and the thing about quality time is that it doesn't really matter to me whether we have quality time at all. I think if I'm in the house and he's upstairs and I'm downstairs, we're together. It just doesn't occur to me that we're not. Whereas for Miles, he wants my time, nobody else. He wants nobody on the phone.
Undivided attention.
Undivided attention. And so it has been hard for me to understand how important that is for him. And sometimes he's had to get really, really upset for me to understand it, to say, I need your time and I need you. I need to know that I'm the most important person in your life, and the only way I know that is if you give me your undivided attention. And I am still learning that.
Yep.
The third way of expressing love is through giving our partner thoughtful presents. This expression of love seems materialistic to some people, but to others, presents are a powerful visual symbol of love. Giving a present shows our husband or wife we were thinking of them when we weren't together, and it can remind them of our love many times over each time they use it or look at it. Of course, birthdays and anniversaries are opportunities to show love in this way, but giving a present spontaneously can mean even more. And presents don't need to be expensive. A flower picked from the garden and given with a note can express great affection.
The fourth way of expressing love is through physical affection. For some people, touch speaks louder than words. Our husband or wife may feel special and loved through all sorts of physical contact, from a hug, a kiss, holding hands, putting an arm around them, all the way through to making love.
We discovered quite early on through looking at our love languages that for Eric, physical affection was incredibly important to him as a way of feeling my love. I used to do lots of other things like buy him presents or write him notes, but nothing would take the place of a big hug or holding a hand or just being affectionate with my feelings through physical touch. It's important.
It was, for me, it was a real revelation. We looked at the love languages bit, and I thought I had the various love languages, but actually the practical experience of it was that physical affection, sex, was one of the most important things for me. And I think it was difficult for me to understand that, but also it was a learning thing for us both. That Jules would learn that that's the most important thing for me. But it's amazing, it has helped our marriage immensely, knowing that.
The fifth way of showing love is through kind actions, doing things for our partner. Kind actions might be routine things, such as cooking, ironing, mowing the lawn, or doing the washing up. Or they might not be part of our routine. When we do something for our husband or wife out of the blue, something they don't expect, such as washing the car, clearing out the cupboards, or making their favourite cake.
These 5 expressions of love are like different languages that communicate love. We've based one section of the marriage book around this concept, but we'd also recommend that you read Gary's book.
All 5 are important in every marriage. But just as we all have a native language that we understand instantly, we all find that one of these communicates love more effectively than the others.
This is something else that we've learned from the course, because I was very much the sort of person that likes to show practical support and love to Hazel. So I might clean her shoes, make her pack lunch, you know, iron her clothes, which I still do, but that's not necessarily how Hazel likes to feel loved. She likes to be hugged and touched and told she's wonderful, and you know, and that's something that I've had to learn, because I'm not very touchy-feely, you know, I never have been. So, you know, that's something that that you brought up when I thought everything was going well, you know, and she said, no, I want you to love me this way, as well as all that stuff which I love, which I love you for, but I also want this, you know, and that's taken me time to get used to.
It's been such a helpful discovery for us to find out the order of importance of these expressions of love for each other. For Nicky, loving words are closely followed by actions. I know he feels loved through the things that I do for him.
For Scylla, quality time is closely followed by physical affection.
You need to work out your #1 love language in order to be able to tell your fiancé. You can't expect them to know automatically.
Some people assume their partner feels loved in the same way that they do. So they try and communicate love in the way they understand it and want to receive it.
But that doesn't work.
Which is why we may well have to learn our fiancé's language of love. And it can be just like learning a foreign language. It takes effort, discipline, and practice.
I learned that Deb's love language is affirming words. And I find that really, really difficult, because in my family, 4 boys and my dad, we just thought that saying anything nice to each other was just a sign of weakness. And, you know, you're just like, well, what does he want if someone says something nice to you? So when I find out that my wife needs encouragement and kind words and acknowledgement and appreciation all the time, I just found that like next to impossible. So I had to really learn. So this morning I see all this folded washing in my cupboard, and I go, hey darling, thanks for doing the washing and folding it all up in the cupboard. And I think, does she really want me to say that? She goes, oh yeah, thank you. She just loves it that I say that. And I don't understand it, but she does.
Some of us have to get over feeling self-conscious, inadequate, or awkward. That may be the case if, for example, you discover that physical affection is particularly important to your fiancé, but being demonstrative doesn't come easily to you, or wasn't part of your experience at home as you were growing up.
We want you to do an exercise now that will help you to discover the order of importance of these 5 love languages for yourself, so that you can tell your fiancé.
We suggest you each write down 6 specific occasions on which you've particularly known your fiancé's love for you. They might be major events, or it could be something very small, but which was significant for you. For example, you might write down, I felt loved when you gave me that CD I wanted. That might show that thoughtful presents are important to you.
Or, I felt loved when you cooked my favourite meal for me. That might indicate that kind actions mean a lot to you.
Taking into consideration what you've put down, try to put the 5 ways of showing love into an order of importance for yourself. Then, without showing each other what you've put, try to guess the order of importance for your fiancé.
And when you've both finished, show each other what you've written down. And we're going to give you 10 minutes to do that. We'd encourage you to go on discussing the order of these love languages after this session. The order may well change, and it can take some time for you both to discover which is top of the list for you.
We're going to go on now to look at the importance of sex in marriage. We went up to Scotland and we asked people there, how important is sex in marriage?
I think good sex in a marriage is very important.
It's very, very important.
I don't think it's that important at all.
I think it's very important.
You think it's got to be good on a daily basis?
Yeah.
Very important. Good sex is obviously going to be a massive element of a marriage, definitely.
You haven't got to give it up if you're old, put it that way.
Yeah. And don't stop once you've had kids.
Yeah, keep going until you're really old.
Absolutely, yes.
I think good sex is as important as those other facets.
I think obviously sex is a very important thing in marriage.
Sex has to be important. To keep everything going, it has to be. So,
I'd like to be married without it.
The sexual relationship is a wonderful way of expressing our love for each other. Sex is communication at the deepest levels of our personality. And it joins two people together, not just physically, but emotionally, psychologically, and even spiritually.
The sexual relationship both expresses the unity between a husband and wife and creates the unity between them. Each time a couple makes love tenderly and generously, the bond between them is strengthened. That's why sex is a vital and integral part of a marriage.
Sadly, the Church hasn't always given a positive view of our sexuality. Some theologians in the early centuries warned married couples that the Holy Spirit left the bedroom when they engaged in sexual intercourse. And there was one bishop in the Middle Ages who went even further. He told his congregations to abstain from sexual intercourse on Thursdays in remembrance of Christ's rapture, on Fridays in remembrance of Christ's crucifixion, on Saturdays in honour of the Virgin Mary, on Sundays in commemoration of Christ's resurrection, and on Mondays out of respect for departed souls. Hence the saying at the time, thank God it's Tuesday.
Woody Allen went to the other extreme when he remarked, there are only two things that matter in life. One is sex, and the other really isn't all that important.
And we want to clear up any misunderstanding and to make it quite clear that God loves sex. The Bible portrays sex as a gift of God for our enjoyment.
There's a book right in the middle of the Bible called The Song of Songs, which is an erotic love poem celebrating a couple's sexual relationship. We're to feel no guilt or shame about sex within a loving marriage relationship.
But sex is not given for our selfish enjoyment. Nowadays, in our society, with its high level of individualism, the question is, how can I satisfy my desires in the way that I choose?
Everything we need for an exciting sex life available on the high street. Today we are bombarded by subtle and not so subtle messages telling us how we can achieve ultimate satisfaction in the sexual arena.
I think it's just the pressure of what we get from films and magazines. Sometimes I get letters from people that say, "Dear Mr. Parsons, I've just read that most couples have sex 2.7 times a week." I have no idea what the 0.7 is either. They say, "We don't have sex anything like that often. Are we abnormal?" And it's the pressure of the media. It's media man and media woman. Media man is rough yet tender, has equipment that always works perfectly. Media woman never has a headache, is never anxious, probably never has a period. This couple are at it every single night of their lives. And most of us ordinary people are just rushing to try to keep up with this incredibly false image.
Yes, it seems that if we're not having instantaneously wonderful sex every time we're under the sheets, then there's something wrong with our relationships, and it's time to look elsewhere for satisfaction, whether that be through an affair or fantasy relationships on the internet or phone.
A fantasy relationship can create a wedge in a marriage, and they can be fueled by being obsessed or fascinated with some famous person, or fueled by texting or email correspondence. And we really do need to be wise, because what may appear very innocent can get out of control and ruin a marriage.
The increased availability of pornography is also causing problems in some marriages. There was a time when you had to go out of your way to find explicit material, but now you can access it in your own home at any time of day on TV or computer. 10% of people who are seen by Relate, the organisation in the UK that deals with relationship problems, blame internet pornography for their difficulties.
We're told that the use of pornography can spice up a sex life, but in our experience it often destroys it. Women write to me and say, I've just discovered my husband is using a pornography. And they will say that makes me feel less than a woman, it makes me feel I can't keep up with his fantasies, but more than that, it isolates him. I just can't reach him in this world of fantasy. Sometimes men will say, my wife is using sexually explicit material, again in a fantasy world, and those men find it hard to match up to those images. And we begin with using pornography in what we think will be a positive way, but time and time again, it eats at the very heart of relationship.
The good news is there is help available for people struggling with addiction to pornography and fantasy relationships. The first step to recovery is admitting the problem exists.
It is very, very therapeutic to confess that you have a problem with it. And that's the beginning of discovering healing in that whole area.
The other thing about pornography is that it's self-focused sex. And all self-focused sex, whether fantasy or real, that concentrates solely on our own desires, will ultimately hurt ourselves and others.
Good sex is always other-focused. It requires the giving of ourselves in love and commitment, not for a short period, not for as long as infatuation lasts, but for life.
Sociologist Alan Storkey writes, trust is one of the prime requirements of a good sex life. When a couple trust one another, they can enjoy giving and receiving. But when one person might use the other, there is a tension.
Because sex requires us to give ourselves in love and commitment, the best way of all is to keep it for marriage.
For many people today, that's an outdated, even a laughable idea. Yet one danger of sex outside marriage is that it can cause us to relate at a surface level. Sex can easily become the basis of our relationship rather than love and commitment.
Our own experience was that waiting wasn't easy. Nikki and I had been going out for a year and we were madly in love and we started sleeping together. It seemed the most natural thing to do. We were committed to our relationship and we weren't sleeping around. We weren't being promiscuous.
Then we both started hearing about Christianity for the first time in terms of a personal relationship with God. And we knew that if we were to make a commitment to Jesus Christ, that would mean stopping sleeping together. As a result, we held Christianity at arm's length for some time. Our fear was that if we stopped sleeping together, our relationship would drift apart.
However, we got to the point where both of us thought, as a result of all that we'd heard, we think Christianity is true, and we made a commitment to follow Jesus Christ as best we could. As a result, we decided that we would stop sleeping together until we got married.
We discovered our fears were unfounded. Far from drifting apart over the next 2.5 years, we experienced a new freedom in our relationship and developed a deep friendship that we were so grateful for when we came to get married.
We don't want to pretend that it was easy or that we always got it right.
I remember well a game that we would play. I would do something to arouse Scylla.
Which would cause me to do something to arouse Nikki.
Which would cause me to do something to her, and so on. And if we went further than we intended, it wasn't my fault because she made me do it. We came to realise that we needed to help each other rather than to lead each other on. So we decided to set ourselves some guidelines.
We decided it was better not to go away on holiday alone together, as we knew that that would put us in a situation of temptation beyond what we could naturally withstand.
We also decided it would be better not to stay somewhere alone with no fear of disturbance, as that would create a situation of intimacy that was better kept for marriage.
It may sound very obvious, but we also decided it was going to be easier to keep sex for marriage if we kept our clothes on and didn't lie down on a bed together.
Some couples tell us that they're keeping sex for marriage, but feel it's fine to sleep in the same bed without making love. But actually, that imposes a need to hold back that's unnatural and that can lead to difficulties after they get married, as they find themselves struggling to let go and to feel utterly free to arouse one another.
We all need to work out our own guidelines that will make our sexual relationship as good as it can be when we get married.
In the Song of Songs, there's a refrain that comes a number of times. Do not awaken love until it so desires. And it points to the need to wait until the proper time before arousing each other, because once awakened, physical desire is much harder to control.
We did keep sex for marriage, but it was very difficult because we were engaged for such a long time.
It's not easy. It was definitely difficult, and I had to make a huge effort to keep him out of my bed, basically.
Can't say that.
As we said in session 2 about commitment, marriage is about giving ourselves to each other for the rest of our lives, building something new together. It's both challenging and exciting. That is why sex and the marriage vows belong together. They are both about giving ourselves to one another.
We want to make a radical suggestion to some of you. If you're living together, think about whether it's at all possible to move apart until you get married. In that way, your marriage will be a new start together. It'll mark that moment of commitment as a new beginning in your lives.
And we want to suggest that if you're sleeping together, you consider whether you'd like to keep future sex for marriage. We understand that won't be easy, but it will make your wedding night and honeymoon more special and will underline what you're doing in getting married.
Our wedding night was very disappointing, really. We'd had sex before we got married, and so consequently it really wasn't very different, and it's a big disappointment to us, and especially to Christine.
Well, I just ended up in tears, you know. In the end, there was no sex at all that night. It was just disappointing, and I just really wished I'd waited. Yeah.
Keeping sex for marriage requires self-control. But learning to say no is a good discipline. And discipline is required in large measure in every marriage, especially at those times when we find ourselves attracted to somebody else. Keeping sex for marriage is difficult, but we believe you'll be glad of it in the long run.
For both of us, it was really important to keep sex for marriage. And for me, it's something I've always done. So it was something it was naturally the way I thought. And that was the way I wanted to treat our relationship. And yes, it was difficult, but it wasn't as difficult as you'd think. And it was so worth it from my point of view. Really can't describe the difference it made. It was so worth it.
And for me, it was slightly different circumstances, but I wanted this relationship to be different from previous relationships. And I wanted to try a new way, you know, having become a Christian sort of fairly recently before this relationship. I wanted to see if keeping sex for marriage was, you know, that going to be very different. And I found it was incredible because the whole friendship and side of our relationship developed so much better. And it's been something that's very special now in our relationship.
None of us can turn the clock back, but the wonderful thing is that God takes us from where we are now.
Please look at the next exercise called Sex and Commitment. We want you to discuss your own guidelines for your physical relationship before you get married. We assure you we're not going to ask you what you've decided, but we suggest that you ask your fiancé what they would most like. They may want to keep sex for marriage, but are afraid of hurting you by saying so. But it's better to be honest. Then you can work out how to go forward together. And we're going to give you 10 minutes to discuss this.
Now we're going to look at what it takes to build a good sexual relationship in a marriage.
There are a number of secrets to keeping sex alive. The first is to see it as a journey.